Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sotah daf Kafeh. This week's learning is sponsored by the Greenstone family in loving memory of their dear husband, father, and grandfather, Dov Shabtai ben Yoshua Lev. Saba was a dedicated and committed learner of Torah. The fact that he was consistent in his learning speaks to his devotion to the study of Torah, and it's clear that he instilled that same passion in his children and grandchildren. Saba was always so proud to see many of his children and grandchildren learning daf Yomi. Today's daf is sponsored by Shelley and Avi Unitzman in loving memory of Albert Kovney and wishing long life to Serena Kovney. We're going to get started with a quick review of the last sugya. It was a little bit complicated, and I looked back at it and realized that there was some of a girsa debate how exactly to read it, and I actually thought that Tosfot's reading sounds like a bit of a better reading. So we're going to quickly go back to the last sugya, and I will share screen with the study guide so you can see. We had a machlokah between Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan. This all got us started from the Mishna, where we said our Mishna only matches Rabbi Yonatan because both the Shomer Yabam and the betrothed woman is excluded from the laws of Sotah. Can't bring them to be a Sotah. According to Rabbi Yoshia, only the betrothed woman, but not a Shomer Yabam, not one waiting to do Yibam. To which the Gemara said, why do you even need psukim for all this? They each darshan different, each halacha of theirs from a pasuk. Rabbi Yoshia said you don't need a pasuk for the arusa of Rabbi Yoshia or the Shomer Yabam and the arusa of Rabbi Yonatan to exclude them because it already says mi baladei ishech, with right, you slept with someone in addition to your husband, which means that you had to have been with your husband first. And in arusa and Shomer Yabam generally have not had relations with their potential or future spouse, right, whether fiance or upcoming Yabam. To which the Gemara answered, and here's just a minor problem with, you can ignore this line in the chart, I'll fix it after class. But basically what we explained was, according to Rabbi Yoshia, it must be a case where both Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan, when it comes to the betrothed woman, where he actually ended up having relations with her before they were married. Okay, against the law, basically, but he did it anyway. And then he could actually bring her to be a Sotah. And when it comes to the Yevama, according to Rabbi Yonatan, it would be that he slept with the Yevama before she was actually married to him. To which we said, but wait, that doesn't make any sense. That part about the Yevama Beit Chamia in her father-in-law's house, meaning right while she was still waiting for Yibum, can't possibly be. Why? Because according to Rav, once she does that, Hana Lakol, she's his wife for all intents and purposes, right? Being Yibum, we learned Haba Yivim To. It doesn't matter whether it's Ba'ones, B'ratzon. It doesn't matter if it's. Well, it doesn't make a difference. As soon as he has relations with her, she is his for all intents and purposes, which would mean that she would have a law of Sotah as well. To which they answer, it must be that Rabbi Yonatan said the Yevama is excluded from Sotah. Why? Because he holds like Shmuel against Rav, who said, Lo kana ela ledvarim hamurim b'parasha. The only thing that happens when he has relations with her, if it was not for the purposes of marriage, is that he inherits her, is that she doesn't need chalitza anymore if she wants to marry someone else, but not that she's his wife. And that's why she doesn't have a law of Sotah. Now, here comes the tricky part in the Gemara. The Gemara then said, Ihachi, if so, it should have said, Rav Damar Rabbi Yoshua, Shmuel Damar Rabbi Yonatan. Now, it's a little bit tricky because where should it have said it, and why is that such a question? Tosfot says the words Ihachi do not appear here, okay? Or he says that Rashi has a girsa without Ihachi, and he basically, because he questions the words Ihachi don't make any sense, and he says, get rid of the words Ihachi. And then the sugya reads a little bit better, because then it's just suggesting, once we establish that Rabbi Yonatan goes like Shmuel, right, that Lo kana ela dvarim hamurim b'parasha, again, Rabbi Yoshia has a Tana, but would go according to the same logic that Shmuel held, which is Rabbi Yonatan, who says the Yevama is out of the laws of Sotah, would then presumably hold like Shmuel, who said that Lo kana ela dvarim hamurim b'parasha, meaning if he has relations with her without intent to marry her, they're not actually married, right? And that's why he can't bring her as a Sotah. And Rav, who says that kana lakol, if he has relations with her, she's immediately his wife, it explains why he would hold like Rabbi Yoshia that there is a law of Sotah. So basically what we're saying is, why don't we say then, which we could say, it's not that a question, Ihachi, why on earth, right? This is a problem. Why didn't it say it? It's more a suggestion. let's say, why don't we just say right now, Shmuel lines up with Rabbi Yonatan, Rav lines up with Rabbi Yoshia, which is exactly what the chart shows here. To which then the Gemara says, no. Okay, and then we saw one of the rejections. We're going to see the second one today. We can say that Rav would say, I can even hold like Rabbi Yonatan, okay? Which is, Rav said generally, he sleeps with her, kana lakol, which you would think would mean there's din of Sotah. How could he hold like Rabbi Yonatan? He says there's no law of Sotah. Well, remember, Rabbi Yonatan said the reason there's no Sotah by Yibum is because there's a special drasha from a pasuk to exclude the Yibama, to which Rav is going to say, that's the whole thing. Why do you need a pasuk to exclude her? Because really, kana lakol, she really is his wife for all intents and purposes, but not for Sotah. And for that, we have a special drasha that excludes her from Sotah. And in that same vein, we're going to do the reverse with Shmuel. Shmuel could say, and here we're starting from the top of our daf, Ana de'amre afilu Rabbi Yoshia. I can explain myself even according to Rabbi Yoshia. I think if a man has relations with his yivama, not for the purposes of marriage, they're not married at all. No, Rabbi Yoshia says she can have laws of Sotah. So how can that be? But again, how did Rabbi Yoshia get there? Because of the drasha on that word ish, right? The ish came to include someone who shouldn't have been included otherwise. So he says with the exact same logic as Rav, as again the Gemara put in the words in the mouth of Rav, we're going to say this. Why did they need a verse to include the Yivama? It specifically proves my point. From here we learn that she must have not been his wife at all. And only because of this extra drasha and pasuk does it tell you, oh, but because of this, she is included in the laws of Sotah. So Shmuel could explain himself matching up to Rabbi Yoshia as well. So what the Gemara tried to do at the end here is suggested, why don't we say Shmuel lines up perfectly with Rabbi Yonatan and Rav lines up perfectly with Rabbi Yoshia, to which they say no. The fact that both Rabbi Yonatan and Rabbi Yoshia got to their answers through drashot basically could be explained that the drasha is coming to override the approach that we thought was opposite, but maybe works with them and says, don't think she's the wife, or yes, think she's the wife, and comes to drasha to say the opposite. Okay, and then this would be unique. It would be kana lakol except for the Sotah, and it would be lo kana l'shum davar except for the Sotah. So you would kind of have to read it a little bit different. Okay, so that in the end is a rejected suggestion according to the way we're going to read it today, not the way I read it when I taught it the first time, because I later looked and I think it's a better reading this way. The way we read it last time was more that this was a difficulty. Well, why didn't they say that? And then they explained why they didn't say it. The content's still the same. It's just a matter of what purpose this is serving in the sugya. Okay. Now we're moving on to more simple matters. Okay. We have a bunch of interesting questions in today's daf, and the structure is going to be very similar. I'll show you kind of charted out and you'll get a sense of where we're going today. We're going to start with a question. We're going to show the two sides of the question. And then we're going to bring three sources. They're actually all one source. It's all our Mishna. Three different cases in our Mishna in an attempt to get to the answer yes. Okay, we'll see what the question is in a minute. We're going to reject the first two suggestions, but we're going to be left with the third, with an answer. Then we're going to ask another question and show the two sides. We're going to bring a source, again, from our Mishnah to try to get to an answer, and it's going to be rejected. Then we're not going to have an answer. Then we're going to have a third question. And again, we're going to bring three sources, one of them being our Mishnah, and one being another Mishnah, and one being a braita in Sanhedrin, to try to get to an answer. And we're going to reject the first two again and be left with the third as an answer. Okay, and then there's a few little things after that, but that's the basic structure of the bulk of today's stuff. Okay, it happens to be a very long Amud Aleph and a very short Amud Bet. Okay, so if you're wondering when we're getting toward the end of class that we haven't turned to the second side, don't worry yet. Okay, so the question is asked, Overet al dat. This brings us back to a very famous Mishnah in Ketubot. If you remember, Overet al dat Moshe v'dat yehudit. Remember what happens to a woman who goes against dat Moshe and dat yehudit, and presumably Rashi says we're trying to hear about dat yehudit, which are things like she goes out into the shuk with her hair uncovered. She is tova b'shuk, which could mean different things, right? She speaks with all these other men. Okay, things that are kind of Sotah-like to a certain extent, things where the woman does something lacking tzniut, perhaps suggesting she's doing things with other men. According to the Mishnah, she breaks their marriage contract. It basically goes against her ketuba. And therefore, what happens? Teitzei below ketuba. Okay, that's what the Mishna says. It means he divorces her and she loses her ketuba money. Now we're going to ask a bunch of questions. Soon we're going to get to the main question, which even though the Gemara is not going to really directly answer, although maybe indirectly we'll get to an answer, which is, does he have to divorce her or can he choose not to? Okay, hold off on that one. But the question the Gemara asks here is, Overet al dat, tzricha hatra'a lafsida ketubata o enat tzricha. The fact that she loses her ketuba, does that happen the moment she does one of these things? Or does she need to be warned first? Okay, does she only lose her ketuba if we warned her? So now, what they're going to do is, they're going to compare the kinui, which is warning the woman, with hatra'a. They're going to basically say they're one and the same. Now, normally we talk about hatra'a, it usually means, do you know that if you're going to do this sin, you will, right, the following punishment will come upon you. So some people think that that's what it means here by hatra'a, but others think no. Since we're going to ultimately compare it to kinui, what is kinui? Kinui, there's no warning of a punishment. Kinui is the husband says, I am warning you, you are not to go into a room alone with this man. So it's possible that the hatra'a meant here is just a simple, do you know that you're not allowed to go out in the shuk with your hair uncovered? Okay, it could be something like that. So now the question is, does she need this warning or not? And here go the two sides of the question. Do we say, look, she broke the contract and therefore she doesn't need to be warned about it. Okay, they don't really explain the two sides so well, but it's basically, does she need to be warned or does she not need to be warned? Okay, maybe the woman needs to be warned. Why? Maybe if she realizes, right, this is in general why we believe in warnings, because maybe she doesn't realize it's such a bad thing, right? So maybe she thinks it's not such a big deal. And maybe if you tell her it's a big deal and that she, maybe also that she's going to lose her ketuba, maybe she'll change her mind about it. Okay. And in the end, that's really what we're ultimately looking for, to improve her behavior. So maybe yes, maybe no. Like I said, we're going to bring three sources and you can see in the chart, each source is going to try to, in the end, say that you need to warn her. She doesn't just lose her ketuba by doing it, only if she's warned, which already, majorly limits the cases where she'll lose her ketuba. Because if she wasn't warned, then nothing will happen. Tashma. So first source. Arusa v'shomeret yabam. Again, they're all three going to be from our Mishna. The arusa and the shomeret yabam lo shotot v'lo notzlo ketuba. Right? They don't drink the Sotah waters and they lose their ketuba money. Now, we inferred from here before, and we're going to infer it again. It says lo shotot. It doesn't say lo mekanim. You don't do kinui. So from here, what do we infer? Mishju de lo shata. She doesn't drink the waters, but hakinu yamachnile. But he does warn her. Now, what would be the purpose of warning her if not? Remember what we talked about. If he warns her and she goes into a room alone with a man, what happens to her at that point? Right? If he decides not to bring her as a Sotah to the Beit HaMikdash, or like in our case where he can't bring her because she's only betrothed to him, or Shomeret Yabam to him, what happens to her? Well, she's forbidden to him. Okay, she's forbidden to the guy she was in the room alone with, and she loses her ketuba. So they say, if we're assuming from this Mishnah that he can do the kinui, he just can't bring her to the final stage of drinking the waters, lemai, what's this for? Lav sidak ketubata, not to make her lose her ketuba money, which means that you can lose your ketuba money, right? Only if you're warned, because otherwise, what would be the purpose of warning her? If it's just to lose your ketuba money, she'll lose her ketuba money even without being warned. Because presumably, if going into the shuk with your hair uncovered would cause you to lose your ketuba, then obviously this woman who's doing something way worse, which is the husband, she went into the room alone with this man, right? And he warned her not to. So obviously it's lafsidak ketubatan. What do you see? She has to be warned first. Or without the warning, she wouldn't. So Amar Abaye, lo schalav. So the first rejection is to say, no, maybe she doesn't lose her ketuba in this case. The fact that the Mishna says she doesn't drink the waters, which implies there is kinui and setira, which means, right, he warns her. What's the purpose of the warning? Well, the purpose could be maybe she doesn't lose her ketuba because maybe it's not that it's not that she needs the kinui to lose her ketuba. She'll lose her ketuba anyway, even if he didn't warn her, because that's overet al dat, one more overet al dat, going into a room alone with a man, right? The one that the husband even doesn't, is worried about. But Whether he warns her or not, it wouldn't matter. She'd lose her ketuba anyway. What's the warning for? The warning is because without the warning, she won't be forbidden to her husband. When does a woman get forbidden to her husband? Either there's witnesses she slept with another man, then for sure she's forbidden to her husband, or when there's kinui and setira. So in this case, she's only betrothed to him. But if he was jealous of her with some other man and warned her not to be in a room alone, and she went into a room alone with the man, that's enough to forbid her to him. So that could be the issue why you need the warning. Not for the ketuba. She could lose the ketuba no matter what, whether he warned her or didn't warn her, because that would be overet al dat. Rav Papa has a different rejection, and he says there's a third possibility, right? We said it's to lose the ketuba, or maybe not to lose the ketuba. Maybe you do that even without the warning, but it's just to forbid him. Rav Papa says, Lash kotakashi nesua. He could warn her when they're betrothed or shomer yabam. Why? Because if she ends up in a room alone with a man once they're married, based on the kinui that was done during the betrothal, he could actually bring her to drink the waters, assuming the setira happened while she was married to him. Okay, so the kinui from rescind works later to connect with the setira that was after the marriage. So that's, and they're going to prove it from a Mishna. You don't do kinui for narusa to have her drink the waters when she's married, but when she's betrothed. I just said that wrong. When she's betrothed, you can have her warn her now, so that when she's married, if she goes alone with in the room alone with the man that you warned her during the betrothal, that will actually take effect and she'll be a sotah. So again, the inference from our Mishna that she doesn't drink the water, but you can do kinui, could be telling you could do kinui because if she later is alone with that man when you're married, then you can take her to court, right, and bring her to be a sotah. So the first source doesn't prove anything about needing a warning to lose her ketuba. Now, these two answers that we had, that maybe the reason for the kinui is to forbid him to her, or maybe the reason for the kinui is so that when they're married, neither one is going to work for this next source, which is going to make this next source a much stronger proof, although even this will be rejected. Rava brings a different proof. Tashma, let's learn from the continuation of our mission. Almana l'kohen gadol, grusha v'chalutza l'kohen ediot, mamzera l'nisina l'Yisrael, ba Yisrael l'mamzeru l'netin, lo shotov v'lo notzlo ketuba. These are all sorts of forbidden marriages, forbidden for a kohen to marry certain people, kohen gadol to marry a widow, regular person to marry a mamzeret, a woman to marry a mamzer. Okay, all those kind of cases. Don't drink the sotah waters and don't get their ketuba. Now again, what is inferred from here? They don't drink the sotah waters, but there is kinui. Mishdu de lo shatyaha kinui maknela, right? If they wanted to say no kinui, they would have said no kinui. So again, what's the purpose of the kinui if not to have her lose her ketuba? Ulamai. For what? What's the purpose of the kinui? Let's try what Abai said last time. Right? You can't possibly say it's for when they're married. They are married. Ila asran alav ha'asira mekaiman. If it's to forbid them to their husband, what do you mean? They were forbidden from the beginning. A widow can't marry Kohen Gadol. So you can't say they're any worse because now she can't stay married to him because she was with some other man because he warned her and she went into a room alone with him. She can't be with him in any case. He's a forbidden marriage to her, right? Or she's forbidden, whatever, he's forbidden to marry her. So, elalav, it must be the only purpose of kinui in this case, because the only possible ramification could be lafsidan ketubatam, for them to lose their ketuba money. So here you see again, you need to be warned in order to lose your ketuba money. Otherwise, there would be no purpose for the kinui in this case. Again, this is all an inference because it never talks about kinui in the Mishnah, but assuming they say they don't drink seems to imply there is kinui. The only purpose for the kinui would be lafsi ketubatan. But no, there's one other ramification. Amarav Yehuda midiskarta, which we didn't need to mention last time because we had other answers, but now we're going to mention it. Lo leosra leboel keba'al. Ditnan, let's just read the Mishna and then we'll explain. Kashem she'asura labal, kach asura laboel. Generally, let's say a woman actually sleeps with another man while she's married to, A, she sleeps with B. Now, in that case, she's forbidden, we know this already, to her husband, and she's forbidden to the person she has relations with. What about a sotah? Sotah is a woman who we don't know for sure that she had relations with this other man. However, if there's kinui, and then she went into the room alone, there's setira with this man, that is enough to forbid her also not only to her husband, which we already learned is forbidden, also to the man that she's suspected of being with, even though, remember, we don't even know what really happened there. But it's enough suspicion since the husband was already jealous and warned her, and she went against the warning, and they went into a room alone. Again, we assume, right? We still don't know for sure, but it's enough to forbid her, right? We can't, the woman still isn't guilty until she goes through the Sotah process and proves her guilt or innocence. But already she's forbidden to ever marry that guy. So now we say that's the ramification of the shtia here. She might be a widow married to a Kohen Gadol, for example. They're not allowed to be together, but they're married anyway. And by the way, it's interesting. She does get a ketuba in this case. You might have thought. So they say the rabbis didn't penalize the ketuba here. The rabbis kept the ketuba in this case, even though it was a forbidden marriage. But if she does kinui and setira, she will be forbidden to the guy that she was in the room with. Okay, so if she ever divorces or gets divorced or her husband dies, this Kohen Gadol, then she can't marry that guy. Okay? So there's another ramification, and you don't have to say it's to lose her ketuba. However, this third source is going to be clear. Rabbi Chanina Misura, Tashma, let's learn from here. Remember these cases where the beitin can get involved. He was of sound mind originally, but then either became a deaf mute. Okay, it would have to be he was of sound mind originally, because otherwise the marriage would only be on a rabbinic level, and that wouldn't be relevant here. It has to have a Torah marriage validity. So now, if he became a deaf mute, which is considered someone without that, or nishtata, he loses his mind, or he was in jail. Now it says here, in all those cases, the beitin can get involved and do kinui. Now, here, you're ready for the words? What's the purpose of the kinui? They tell you exactly in the Mishna. Lo lahashkotamru, it's not that they're going to be able to make her drink the Sotah waters because they're not the husband. Again, there was a machloket about this, but ela leposlami ketubata. Their power is what? They can make her lose her ketuba money. So what do you see here? Kinui makes you lose your ketuba money, which basically teaches you, if there's no warning, you wouldn't lose your ketuba money. Okay, if she just goes into a room alone with this man, which is kind of equated with any other woman who's overet al dat yehudit, goes against any of these, she's a prutza, as they say, she's, kind of going around with other men, doing all sorts of things that are a break of the marriage contract, she wouldn't be poslamik tubata. You wouldn't be able to deprive her of the ketuba money unless you had warned her first. And that's what the purpose of the kino here of the court is. Shmamina, by hatra'a shmamina. From here you can infer they need warning. Now they say, well, this was pretty clear. So I don't understand the first two rabbis. Okay, one was without a name. The second one was Rava. Why didn't they bring this source? This is a very clear source. It says it explicitly. Kulu, my time alo amri meha. Why didn't all of them learn it from here? So they say, okay, it's not that they disagree, and it's not that they really believe this is true, but they thought that Dilma Shane Hatam Delele Aimta de Baal Kla. They didn't think this was a strong enough proof. Why? Because one might distinguish and say, listen, the case where the husband is out of the picture for whatever reason, whether he got sick and is not with the program right now, or he is in jail. Well, maybe, again, they're not saying this is true, but they're saying you might have thought maybe it's not as bad as when the husband's there and sees what she's doing. It's more of like she doesn't have the fear of her husband upon her when her husband's in jail. He's just not there. So she's not as fearful of him. So maybe what? So maybe there the court needs to come in and warn her. But maybe in a case where her husband's there and she does it blatantly in front of his face, she knows what she's doing and that she's breaching the contract. And maybe there she doesn't need to be warned. And that's why they didn't think it was a strong enough proof and tried to bring a proof from somewhere else. It's not to say that there's a difference between these cases, but there was reason to think that maybe you would distinguish, and that's why they didn't bring this source. Okay, second question. What if she does one of these things, overet al dat, and the husband wants to stay married to her? He doesn't care. Okay, right? Classic example. She goes into the shuk without her hair covered. Doesn't bother her husband. So, mekayma or ain't a mekayma? Okay, it could be a worst case was more, she's doing something way worse, and he just decides, I don't really care. I'm happy to stay married to my wife. Well, is he allowed to? Is he not allowed to? Do we say this is all dependent, right? When it says yotz'o shelo b'ketuba, Does it mean yotzot means you have to divorce her? Or does it mean if you want to, you have the option to divorce her? We actually discussed this back then when we learned it. And maybe it's all dependent on, does it bother the husband? If it bothers the husband, then yes, you should divorce her. But if it doesn't bother him, he doesn't have to. Oh, Dilma, kevan de kapi. So what does this mean? Rashi explains this as meaning. Since kloma, kevan de orche de baalim mikpat, since most husbands are bothered by this, so therefore we're going to assume that, right, this is a problem and he really needs to divorce her, because the standard is this is something that bothers husbands and therefore seen as a breach of the marriage contract. So here comes our attempt to answer it, which is going to be unsuccessful. Tashma, the case we just learned, which is elu shebeitim makanim lahem. These are the cases where the beiting gets involved and does the kinui. Misha nitcharesh ba'ala unishtata, o shaya chavush bebeit hasurin, the three cases we just discussed. And if you say it's all dependent on the husband, and if the husband wants to stay married to her, he can, well, what's going to happen now? If the beitin does the kinui and she's nistira, what's going to happen? She's going to be forbidden to her husband. What if her husband doesn't care, right? There's no room for that here because the beitin comes and gets involved. So the husband gets out of jail and the court says, listen, while you were gone, your wife was wandering around with other men. We warned her. She went into a room alone with that guy that we warned her about. Now you're forbidden to her. What if the husband didn't want that? So maybe the beitin does something that the husband doesn't want. So it's clear here, it's not dependent on the what the husband wants. To which the Gemara says, no, that's not true. Because the assumption is, again, this is the Gemara always makes assumptions about human behavior. The assumption is most men will view this as a good thing that the court got involved. So you could say that the court can get involved because the standard is that most men are going to be in agreement with that. But it doesn't mean that if a husband's married to someone whose wife is doing something that is deemed inappropriate, overet al dat, and he doesn't care, it's not to say that he can't basically change his mind about it. So this source doesn't prove anything. So we're stuck with, we don't know. However, when we get to an answer to the next question, we're going to see that seems, the Gemara doesn't say so, but the Rishonim talk about, that seems to answer this previous question. Ibailu, third question for today. The husband warns his wife, don't go into a room alone with a man. Now, what are the ramifications? If she goes into a room alone with a man, we know what's going to happen. He is going to be forbidden to her, and she's going to lose her ketuba money. Okay, but right now we're talking about the fact that he'll be forbidden to her. So he, after warning her in a moment of anger, feels bad about this and says, maybe I shouldn't have done that. And maybe, right, maybe if something does happen down the road, I don't want to be forbidden to my wife. Can he erase what he did basically and say, listen, I'm taking away my kinui? So that, now, what stage is a good question? We're going to get to that question only later. Let's just assume right now it's before the setira happens. Let's say he's worried she's going to go into a room and he'll be forbidden to her and that will be it. He'll never be able to stay married to her and he really loves her despite the fact that he's jealous of her. And, he really wants to stay married. So can he get rid of the kinui or not? Now you can see why this would have ramifications on the previous one. Because if he can undo his kinui, then theoretically it seems like he should be able to also just ignore the fact that she was overet al dat and stay married to her. So now, do we say, it all has to do with what the husband wants. And so it's true. He did the kinui, but now he's reneging on it. So if it all is based on the husband, because you can't get into the stage of a sotah without the husband being on board, the husband's no longer on board. So we stop the process. Or do we say, since he did it already, we don't give him a chance? In other words, it's too late, basically. You should have been smart enough not to do it in the first place, but you did it already. This is the point of no return. Tashma. So now we're going to, like the first question, we're going to have three potential answers, and only the third one is going to work. And the first one is from our Mishna again. Again, we're back to this case. This seems to be the model for many things, or at least attempted model. This is the beitim mekanim lahem. So again, the case where the court can come in and operate. If you say the husband can renege, so then how could the court do something that the husband could later come and undo? Doesn't make any sense. We're going to allow the court to do something that could just be undone. And what will happen then, right? That first of all, it'll be a bit of a mockery of the court. The court got involved, and then you come along and you say, I didn't ask you to do that. To which the answer, Adam maskim al dat beitin. That doesn't prove anything, because let's say this guy gets out of jail, or he was sick and not lucid, and then he became clear-minded again, okay? Or he was healed from his deaf-mute ailment. Well, when he comes out and finds out that the court did this for him, most people are just going to agree with the court. And that's because otherwise it would be a huge mockery to the court, right? It would be like, people don't like to desecrate the value of the court. It becomes a big problem. And we'll see this. We actually touch on Zakeh Mamre. It's also another case where we see a desecration of the court. We want to avoid that at all costs. And most people, if they got out of jail and found out that the court had done this, they would just go with it, because otherwise it would really be a big slap in the face to the court. So therefore, we can assume that maybe this doesn't prove anything. Maybe the husband could be mochel, but he's probably just not going to. And therefore, we allow the court to get involved because the assumption is the husband will go along with the court. Okay, so it doesn't prove anything about whether you can undo it or not. Next, Tashma. Now we're going back to an earlier Mishna. While they're on the way to the court in Jerusalem, what did we learn? Okay, we're going to come back to this case again later today. They give 2 Talmidei Chachamim to go with them on the way, because right now, at this point, she's forbidden to him until she proves her innocence. She doesn't prove her innocence, right, by drinking the waters. She's forbidden to him. Since she's forbidden to him, we want to make sure, because what's going to happen if he sleeps with her in that time period? This is something I told you we'll learn later. He is not free of sin. He did something wrong. Once he's not free of sin, she can't go through the Sotah process. He has to be totally free of sin for the Sotah process to work. So they want to make sure the Sotah process is going to work properly. They have to make sure he doesn't sleep with her. So they give him these 2 Talmidei Chachamim. Now, if you say he could just, let's say he wants to sleep with her. What does he do? All he has to do is undo the kinui, and then he'll be able to sleep with her. So why are you worried about sending these 2 Talmidei Chachamim? If he really wants to sleep with her, what will he do? If he really wants to be with his wife, he can simply undo the kinui, right? Say, I'm changing my mind, and be with her. So you don't need 2 Talmidei Chachamim to prevent them from doing that. To which they say, no, that doesn't prove anything, because Mishna Talmidei Chachamim. Why specifically, and we gave an answer before, but now we're going to give a different answer. Why specifically are they Torah scholars and not just any 2 people to make sure that, we have witnesses? Well, Gemara, because we know because what? If he wants to have relations with her, what will they tell him? Maybe he doesn't know the law. They'll tell him, again, this is giving both options. We tried to say maybe but now they're saying, no. Maybe he can undo his kinui, but he might not know that. So if they see he really wants to be with his wife, they say to him, by the way, if you really want to be with your wife, you can undo your kinui and be with her. So they're there in order to tell him the halacha. This is very similar. Those who learned the Ir Miklat class, so the refuge city, we talked about it then there also. Possibly the reason they sent Talmidei Chachamim is because they know the halacha, and they'll warn the Goel Adam, the relative is trying to kill on the way to the Ir Miklat. They'll say, do you know the halacha is this? So same thing here. So therefore, it doesn't prove anything. Tashma, but now we have a third proof, which is very clear. Rabbi Elazar from the people of Jerusalem told me the following thing. That he learned from Ze'eri told me in the name of the Anshe Yerushalayim. They're like a category of people which are known to be very pious people. He told me 3 things. Number 1, this halacha, a husband that wants to give up on his kinui and erase it, basically undo it, he can do that. So far, it looks like this is going to be a proof, but wait to see till we get to the end. Zaken Mamre, this is a chacham who's a judge. He rules in the court. The judges rule against him, and the majority wins. He loses, and then he goes ahead and teaches like this, like his opinion against the majority of the rabbis. He gets killed for this. Okay, there's a whole details of how this all happens. We'll see it in Sanhedrin. But if the Beitin, if they wanted to say, we're not going to kill you, they have the right to do that. And Ben Sorer Moreh, a wayward son who goes and does all these things, eats all this crazy food and drinks a lot of wine and goes against his parents' wishes. Again, all sorts of details about how this can happen. It's another case where in that case, the Gemara is explicit that it never happened. Sotah, we're just assuming. But this, it says clearly it never happened. Again, there's a debate about it. One says, no, there was one and I sat on his grave. Anyway, by the way, speaking of the Parsha, Bayit Menuga is one of those things. A leper's house never happened according to this. And again, that same person who saw the Zakei Mamre, saw the Ben Sorer Moreh, said, I also sat on I saw a Bayit Mitzorah and I sat on the remains of it, if I remember correctly. Hope I'm not remembering correctly, but I believe it's a Bayit Menuga. Okay, next. So now there's three things there. That's two of them. So now they say the following. So again, if the parents decide because in that case, it's very similar to the Sotah. The parents have to come forward and, so to speak, air out their dirty laundry and talk about their son and say he's not listening to us, etc. So if they wanted to limcholo, mochalim, they could also say we're not interested, even after they brought him in the first place. Now the story continues. Rabbi Yoshia says, when I got to my friends in the south, they agreed with me about two of them. But when it comes to Zakei Mamre, they said no. The court is not allowed to change their mind about it. Why? And that's getting back to this concept of the court. The court has a certain standard to hold up to, because if you start undoing things of the court and you start allowing people who went against the court, it's going to ruin the whole integrity of the court and people believing in the court, and it's going to start raising issues. Oh, people make mistakes, this and that. We really have to make sure that people don't start treating the court with disrespect, because that's really holding up our whole system of law. So basically, that one can't be undone. But shmamina, from here you can infer baal shemachal kinuyo machul shmamina. He could actually undo his kinui, which would seem to imply that he can also decide he doesn't want to, right? Just like there, he can decide, and therefore she ends up with her ketuba money, and doesn't have to divorce her. Likewise, here it seems like he could decide not to divorce her if she's overet al dat, like the previous question, even though it doesn't say so in the Gemara. Now the two of them have a machloket about this case, about the kinui. He says, what if the husband wants to undo it? At what stage is he allowed to undo it? It's only before she was in the room alone with the man. But after she was in this room alone with the man, she already became forbidden to him. You can't undo it at that point. That's too late. Eino machul. Can't do it. One says, no. Even though she might have been forbidden to him for the moment, you can still go back and undo it and undo the prohibition. Fascinating approach. But the Gemara is going to strengthen the first approach, which seems more logical. It seems more to say, no, once the setira happens, you can't undo it. Mimai, from where do we get this from? From Rabbi Yossi. From a reaction the rabbis had to Rabbi Yossi. We actually learned this before. We'll learn it again. This goes back to the Talmidei Chachamim. If you remember, Rabbi Yossi said you don't need Talmidei Chachamim. So why did Rabbi Yossi say you don't need it? Because he says, from a kal v'chomer, we're not worried he's going to sleep with her on the way. So we don't need to put two bodyguards there to make sure. If when she's in nida, we don't put people in your house to make sure you don't sleep with each other when she's in nida, and that's very severe, that's karet. Sotah shibalav, Sotah, which is only a lo taseh, lo kol shekain. Well, the more so, we don't have to worry about it. Amrulo, now what we're looking for is the reaction of the rabbis and what we see from here. Amrulo, no, they say no. Neither we're not worried about, because in a week or so, she'll be permitted to the husband. But a Sotah will never be permitted. Now, what do you mean a Sotah will never be permitted? What did we just say? Now, obviously, when they're going to the Beit, and we're talking, the whole discussion is after the setira. Now, if you say after setira, he could still undo it, then then there is a case where she'll be permitted. He can always undo the kinui. So again, you should say, we're not worried, because worst case, if he really wants to, he'll undo the kinui. And here we see, we don't say that. So the if he wanted to, he could do that and then be with her. So not from what the rabbis respond and say, Sotah has no heter. It must be to get right that lachar stirayin or machul shmaminan. Can't undo it after stira. Okay, last two sections for today, very short now. Meitu ba'alehen ad shalosh shatu. Now we're going back to the Mishna. We're done with our questions. We had three questions, and then a little bit of a debate about this last one. Now we say, if the husband dies before she drinks the Sotah waters, this was in the Mishna, Machloket B'Shamai Beit Hillel, whether she can't drink the water for sure, does she get her ketuba money or not? Now again, the operating principle is, the one who wants to take out the money, the burden of proof is on them. So theoretically, what would you say? She wants to get her ketuba money. She can't prove that she's innocent because she can't drink the water, so she shouldn't get her ketuba. That's Beit Hillel. So what's Beit Shammai? Well, Beit Shammai savre shtar omed legavot ki gavoidam. Beit Shammai says that when a shtar comes up for collection, which is a ketuba when the husband dies, that's when the woman can collect her ketuba. It's as if it's in her hands already. If it's as if it's in her hands already, then who's taking out the money? In order not to pay her, the burden of proof lies on the heirs of the husband. So therefore, that's why Beit Shammai says she gets her ketuba, because it's as if it's already in her hands. Is always who's taking it out of whose. Now it's true, technically the money needs to still go to her, but it's as if she's what we call muchzak in the money. She has the rights to the money. So if they want to not give it to her, they have to burden of proof lies on them and they can't prove it. So basically she gets her money. Turning now to Amud Bet, Beit Hillel says no. It only is considered collected when you actually collect it. Just because the time has come for it to be collected and you can collect it doesn't mean it's considered in your possession. It's not in your possession until it's in your possession, and that's why she doesn't get her ketuba money. What this is really talking about is not the case where the man marries the woman who's pregnant. Talked about that already, but we're really talking about the next three cases, which is a woman who can't have children because she's an aylonit. Okay, she's a woman who never had simanei bagrut at all. Then we have a zkena, a woman who's already past the age where she can have children, and a woman who's an akara for some other reason. She can't have children because of, and we're going to presume in this Gemara that we're talking about a woman who had the potential to be able to give birth, but something happened and she lost that potential to be able to give birth. So now, if you remember, we said that a man who didn't have children yet is not allowed to marry her. So what if he does anyway? So we saw there was a machloket. Okay, in the Mishnah we said, according to the first opinion, the Tanakama, aylonit uskena v'she'ena ruya leleid, and a woman who couldn't have children, which is again because something happened to her along the way. Lo notlo ketuba v'lo shotot. They don't get their ketuba and they don't drink the Sotah waters because he wasn't really supposed to have married her in the first place. But Rabbi Elazar says, yacholu lisai sha'acheret, since he can have other wives in addition to her, therefore it's actually permitted to him to marry her, and therefore there would be loss of Sotah for her. So now Rav Nachman comes to limit Rabbi Elazar and say he's not actually talking about all three cases, he's only talking about two of them, and that's because of some external reason, okay, or some other reason, I should say. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, machloket b'akara uskena. The machloket is he calls her the akara. That's why I called her akara before. The Mishnah just said someone who's eina ruya leleid, can't have children, and azkena, but aylonit divrei hakol lo shotah v'lo notel ketubata. The aylonit, everyone agrees that she doesn't drink the waters and she doesn't get her ketuba. Why? Because of a special drasha in the psukim by the Sotah. What does it say? Shene'emah. What's supposed to happen to the Sotah after she finishes the process if she's innocent? V'nikta, she gets proven innocent. V'nizra'a zera, and she now goes and gets pregnant. To which they say the following. You might think this would exclude all those women, but no, it doesn't. It only excludes someone who never, ever had any potential to have children. That's this unique category of an aylonit. So it distinguishes between an aylonit who never showed signs of maturity at all. That's someone who's considered you never had the potential to have children. These women, even though right now they can't have children, they did at some point have the potential to have children, and therefore they're considered in a regular category, they can become Sotah. Again, only according to Rabbi Elazar. But Rabbi Elazar, they think, would distinguish between these two categories. To which the Gemara is going to bring a meitive, a difficulty from a braita. It's a very long braita. We're only going to start the first case, which has nothing to do with it. Only at the very end are we going to get to the line about the aylonit and show that this seems to go against what Rabbi Elazar, what we just said Rabbi Elazar said. Rav Nachman's understanding of Rabbi Elazar, or Rabbi Baravuaz, because it was quoted in his name. So we'll just read the first case because it's on our daf, but we'll see all these cases tomorrow. And this is going to be very similar to our Mishnah. If he warns an arusa, betrothed woman, or his shomer yabam, the one who's waiting to do yibum with him, Im ad shelo knasa nistira, if the stira happened, we saw this today, before they got married, lo shotah v'lo notel ketubata, right? Only if the stira happened after, we can connect the warning with there. Okay, but that had nothing to do with this. We really quoted this because of the end of that braita, which is going to seem to prove against Rabbi Elazar. And we'll have to see, again, against the way Rav Nachman understood Rabbi Elazar. And we're going to have to question that and figure out if we can resolve it. With that, we're going to finish today's stop. Quick summary. We finished up that, can Rabbi Yoshia and Rabbi Yonatan match up? Can Rav and Shmuel match up with Rabbi Yonatan, Rabbi Yoshia? No, we said no. Then we asked these three questions. Overet al dat, does she need to be warned in order to lose her ketuba or not? We said yes, she does in the end. Someone over Eretz and the husband doesn't want to divorce her. Can he? Does he have to? We said in the end, we didn't really get an answer, but from the last one, we seem to indicate he doesn't need to divorce her. And if he does kinui and wants to change his mind, can he or not? We said he can. Okay, that was clear. And then the question only was, can he do it even after stira, once she was already forbidden to him? Or can he only do it before the stira happens? Which that seemed to be the preferred opinion, only before the stira happens. Then we explained the Beit Shamai, Beit Hillel, machloket, which we said all has to do, they both agree on motzim mechaber alav haraya, the burden of proof lies on the one trying to take out the money. The question was just, is the ketuba, when he dies, is it considered as if she collected it already? And then the burden of proof lies on them, or is it not? In which case the burden of proof lies on her. And again, nobody has a way to prove anything, so the money stays where it is. And then we brought up this last thing about Rabbi Elazar, who disagrees with the rabbis and says, really, these women who can't give birth could become their husbands, and therefore, right, can't have children. They could still be considered the wife of this guy, even though he never had his own children, because he can always take another wife, and therefore there's no issue here. But we then said that he distinguishes, according to Rav Nachman and in the name of Rav Elazar, he distinguishes between the aylonit, who never had the potential. She could never become a Sotah. She could get married to him, but she could never become a Sotah, okay, because of a special drasha in the pasuk, as opposed to the other women who, since they theoretically could have had children at some point, even though now they can't, that is a different category, and those women can become Sotot. Okay, with that, and then we brought a braita to question this understanding, but we'll deal with that tomorrow. Wishing everybody a Shavua Tov. See you tomorrow.